Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining for this installment of the Tuesday Race Talk series. We're doing something new this time. As you can see, we're in person, and I have a guest, a very special guest. Seated beside me is Harry Bremond, who some of us know as Harry. Others refer to him as a legend of Silicon Valley. You see, Harry, unassuming though he may sometimes seem, was one of the founding partners of the legendary law firm of Silicon Valley, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich Rosati. Harry is a modest man of extraordinary accomplishments who I'm blessed to have become a good friend of over the last many years. So I'm happy to be here with him today for him to reflect on his life in Silicon Valley as an African-American at a time when he was one of the only, or even the only, Black lawyer between San Francisco and San Jose. So let me just give you a little background on Harry, and then you'll hear from the man himself. Harry was born in San Francisco in 1934. He graduated high school there. He then attended San Francisco State, where he was a business administration major. He served in the military during the 1950s. And then after the military service, he went to law school at University of San Francisco. After having his own practice in East Palo Alto, he became a partner at the law firm that would later become known as Wilson Sonsini Goodrich Rosati. He joined Wilson Sonsini in the early days, in the 1960s, and remained there until his retirement not many years ago. During that time, he witnessed, it's no overstatement to say, the creation of Silicon Valley. He was there at the founding of many of the firms that have changed our lives and shaped how we live. He mentored young lawyers who have gone on to work in those firms that have changed our lives. He has been a beacon and a path breaker for generations of lawyers of all races. And we are delighted and honored to be able to host him for this conversation, reflecting on his life, his challenges, his accomplishments, and his insights into the world we live in. So Harry, thank you so much.
Well, thank you
For being with us. So let me just start with, you were born in San Francisco, 1934.
Actually, Austin, Texas.
Oh, Austin, Texas. I'm sorry, Austin, Texas. I've already rewritten the story a little. You were born in 1934, though, and you graduated high school in San Francisco.
Correct.
In 1951. This is before Brown v. Board of Education, which for many of us in the legal academy is a, kind of a turning point. So, what was that like growing up in the pre-Brown days in Texas and San Francisco?
Well, what was it like? Well, I think you understand, I grew up in the housing projects, wartime housing projects. And that was not a typical experience. It was pretty difficult as I reflect on growing up in the projects. I lived in the projects until I was a sophomore in college. How was it? Well, it was tough. Many of the guys I grew up with did not have the same extended family. And as you know, life can be like a fork in the road, right and left. And most of the guys went not the right way. And in fact, moving on, I played both high school and college football. And in those days, we had a scrimmage with San Quentin prison inmates. And quite frankly, it was like old home. There were so many people, so many guys on the San Quentin team that I grew up with. So that's really what it was like. And I was lucky that I was able to graduate from high school at a young age and go on to San Francisco State.
And what about, so you, after San Francisco State, you went into the service. After the service, you came back, you went to law school. You also got a business degree while you were in law school. This is a predecessor to the JD MBA. And then you set out to look for work.
Correct.
What was that experience like?
That was different from today's date. I graduated from law school and obtained my what is now the MBA in 1962. And I moved to San Jose and went to work for a cannery, Contadina Cannery. That's the only job I could get. And I worked in the cannery for about a year. I was working in the lab because there were a lot of Spanish-speaking employees, and I spoke English, and therefore I went to the lab. And that was an experience too. Now, the story about going to work in the lab was that I couldn't get a job. So when I moved to San Jose, I was interviewing with all of the various companies, and there weren't many, but interviewed with them, and many of them, I either had too few degrees or too many degrees. Most of the time I was overqualified, and I had two resumes, a resume in which only had I had no degrees, high school education, so that I qualified for the job, and the other resume in which I had the 3 degrees. So that was quite an experience.
And which resume got you that job?
Well, the resume that got me the job was the one, as I recall, with the 3 resumes. They needed the firm Contadina Cannery really needed someone desperately. Mm-hmm. And that's why I got the job, to be quite frank.
But was this a job that was required a law degree, or was it
No,
it was a non-legal job?
It required maybe high school education.
Okay. But so you were unable when you graduated to find a job as a lawyer? Absolutely. Okay. So what did you do then? So you were at Contadina and you had this law degree. How did you make your way from Contadina to law? I went to an NAACP meeting, and one of the persons there happened to be the only Black lawyer there. And in the city of San Jose, in the Valley, he told me that he had an office that I could use. So I went to work for him, not to work for him, but I quit Contadina and went to work. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that because I could type, I would become a legal secretary. So You told me before that when he hired you, he fired his secretary. That's correct. He fired his secretary and I became a legal secretary. In effect, doing all of the typing, what little practice I had, and his whole practice. So that was the story for about a year. Next, I moved from San Jose to East Palo Alto. I moved to East Palo Alto because it turns out the only clients I had or would get, they were African American and they all came from one place. And it was East Palo Alto. I didn't know where the hell that was. So I got in the car one day and I drove north about 20 minutes
to East Palo Alto, and I saw all these Black people. Before the week was over, I had relocated. To East Palo Alto
Before the week was over.
before the week was
Okay.
over.
And you set up your own office there?
Yes, which was quite interesting. I found a person who owned a beauty salon, and she had an extra room in front of the salon. So I didn't have any money. So that became my office until I moved from EPA.
So you were renting a space from the woman who ran the beauty salon then?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then, and what prompted your moving? Were you living in East Palo Alto too at the time, or were you living
Yes, I
elsewhere?
was living in EPA. After moving to EPA, I became a member of the Ravenswood City School District Board of Trustees.
Mhm.
And that was an experience because I was there for, I don't know, on the board for at least a year. And from there, I was approached by Pete McCloskey.
Mhm.
Pete was a lawyer on Welsh Road. He and three other guys were practicing, McCloskey, Wilson, Mosier, and Martin. It was not a firm, it was just a association of four lawyers. And Pete asked me after a few lunches, why don't I come and practice with him?
So this is how you made the jump from the office that had started in the front of the beauty parlor in East Palo Alto, and you made a jump from that office to the firm that would become Wilson Sonsini.
Yes,
Okay.
and it was not much of a challenge, much of a decision, since I only made $500 the first year of practice.
Okay, so you didn't waver on that decision.
I didn't waver, and Pete said, work for me one day a month, and that'll pay your rent. And I said, okay.
Mhm.
And I then moved to what has become the largest, most successful high technology firm in the world.
So let me ask you, how did you and Pete McCloskey come together? What was the connection there? He was on Welch Road, you were in East Palo Alto.
Well, as you know, Pete, those who followed Pete's career know that he was in the Korean War. He was a colonel in the Marine Corps. And one of his buddies from Korea, after getting out of the Marine Corps, moved to Washington. And in the early 60s, a lot of things were happening in this country. And President Kennedy asked him there were a lot of white folks attending the meetings which President Kennedy was convening. And on one of the meetings, Kennedy asked the convener, whose name was Chuck Daly, he wanted some diversification. Pete, because he was Chuck's friend, went to one of the meetings, came back to the Palo Alto area, and showed up at the front door one day and asked me for lunch. I went to lunch with Pete for several weeks.
Mhm.
And finally he said, why don't you come practice with us? If you will work one day a week, that'll pay your rent. And that's how I got to Welch Road in Palo Alto.
Okay. And that is that firm evolved over time. There was some departures, there was some change of personnel, but that was the nucleus
That was
of
the
Wilson
beginning.
Sonsini.
That was the beginning.
And how,
Go ahead.
No,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. That was the beginning, yes.
okay, and when you joined, there were how many lawyers?
When I joined, there were 5 of us. There was, this was, of course, after Pete was elected to Congress and went through one more changes, but then the 4, John Wilson, Roger Mosier, they felt, why don't we get together and form a practice? So they said, form a partnership, an unwritten informal partnership.
Mhm.
So there were 5 of us. I was one of the 5 guys.
Wow. So no, that's amazing, just that far. And then the thing that I've wondered, I'll tell you, and this is a question I've had for many years, because when I was in law school in the 90s, I was at Harvard Law School in the 1990s, Wilson Sonsini was the firm that everyone who wanted to go to Silicon Valley wanted to work at. It was as if there were no other firms in Silicon Valley. Maybe there weren't, I don't know, but that was the firm that loomed large in the imagination. Which sparked a question in my mind then is, how did Wilson Sonsini become Wilson Sonsini? How did it go from the 5 guys, you all deciding to form a partnership? How did it become Wilson Sonsini that was at the heart of the revolution in technology?
Well, in the late 70s, one of the founding partners spun off, formed his own firm, and Larry Sonsini became the leader of the firm, even though his first name was John Wilson, who was then mayor of Patola Valley. But Larry took over the leadership, and at that point, the firm really took off. Silicon Valley also began to grow. Prior to that, we were just a little sleepy community in the valley. But Stanford, great influence. And the firm's leadership, led by Larry Sonsini, the other 3 guys, really took off. At that point, you know, what the thing that impressed me in hindsight was his vision of growth and what was going to make this actually the world. We wanted to be ahead of the curve in terms of technology and things that would change one's life. And that's the reason why we grew, I think, and continue to grow to the point where now, as you know, Rick, there are about 800 or 900 lawyers with 16 offices all over the world.
That's a pretty good record for a firm that you were one of the founders of.
Well, it's a record for some kid from the housing projects. And scrimmage football with the old guys I grew up with.
There you go, right there. So let me ask you, and for many, well, first of all, what was your practice like? Were you a transactional lawyer, litigator? Say a little bit about your practice and
I
how
was
that evolved.
always a litigator. From the moment I really got out of law school, understand, Rick, in those days, there were very, very few African Americans who were few in the practice, and even fewer who were transactional lawyers. Most of us, if we practiced law, we were litigators. And think about it. Damn few clients would hire a Black lawyer to represent them on a contractual matter. But, so there was only one area really, and that is litigation.
Mhm.
And over the years, of course, it's now changed and more opportunities. But I was a litigator then and now. And one thing that's interesting, is that I, along with others, quickly came to realize that the people in the valley, the people in these firms, they did not want to go to court. They felt dollars and cents that they'd rather settle a case than go to court, because going to court would take time.
Mhm.
And why not settle it and get it over with? And everything was evaluated in terms of time. And of course, the ideas which are being, they were all new and different. Damn few understood what they were talking about.
This is the intellectual property ideas you're
Yeah.
talking about. Okay.
And as a matter of fact, I tried the first trade secret case that the firm ever was engaged in. And the only reference was a CEB handbook. You read that little handbook. It was so small, concise, because it was not a field. It was not,
Yeah.
it was nothing. And now, as you know, trade secrets today is like unbelievable. The big item today, I was just, Apple and is involved in the antitrust suit, but it's based on really their technology, their app store.
Interesting.
But anyway,
Yeah, and you were in all of these cases. It sounds like your clients were all or mostly white.
they were all white.
They were all white. Okay, they were all white. Clients were all white, and you were the only. Were you the only Black lawyer at the firm during?
I was the only Black lawyer in private practice from San Francisco to San Jose.
Okay.
And
Wow.
that was for some period of time. I would recruit, and I was always felt this was a failure because the few students, that's African American students, only wanted to practice with the large firms on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So it was a challenge to get the young African Americans to accept the challenge to come to the Valley. And that was one of the reasons there were so few, aside from the other issues which you all know about. I hate to see, race was involved.
Right.
But that's what was happening.
And how were you the, you think now firms have so much talk about diversity and recruiting diverse associates and all.
Yeah.
But you were at Wilson for what, 2 decades or more as the only Black lawyer at the firm.
That's correct.
And how did you weather that? How did you thrive in that environment? How did you do that? Or what were the challenges of that environment?
I think the challenge was really to, one, get along, to fit into the culture of the firm, work hard, do a job for the client. And, quite frankly, I was a community activist from law school on.
Mhm.
The one thing about Wilson is that I was able to continue my activism on social and pro bono issues without interference by the firm. And this is especially the case after Larry Sonsini took over leadership. It was recognized in Bremond, but it recognized that the firm was not going to be an institution without a diverse workforce. But there was this issue of one, numbers. There were not that many African Americans in law school, and two, the West Coast versus East Coast and the Silicon Valley, which, as I mentioned to you at various times in the 70s, it was not all thriving. And as a matter of fact, things would shut down. And we would call it not Silicon Valley, but Death Valley. So it was not easy, but we continued to grow and really grew after the split, and Larry became the unquestioned leader and visionary for the firm.
And did you feel, even though you were at one point, you headed the litigation group, you did a lot of you were involved in a lot of path-breaking cases there in the early days before there even was much law in some of these areas. Did you feel accepted by your colleagues and clients? Was that smooth, or were there bumps in the road there?
Well, I just, and maybe this is something I should have been more sensitive to, but I felt that one, I was representing the client and the firm. And the most obvious cases of opposition came from, believe it or not, from the judges in court. And they did not hesitate to express what, as I look back, express their racist attitudes. So it was difficult then, but what you have to do, I think, then and now, is one, you have to get someone who wants you to be a success. And there is a lot of merit of having someone like you making a decision. One thing, I'm drifting off, but one thing I always wanted to demonstrate by life and otherwise is that if you were a person of color, you would know that I was there to help and assist and mentor you in every way that I could. And that's the way I operated. And I think, frankly, that's the way I think I survived, is the fact that I knew that I was not going to change.
You knew that you were not going to change?
I knew that I was going to continue to be there for young lawyers of color. And I did. And, the people in the firm, they may have objected, but did not express it to me. So I think that's why I've survived.
Okay.
The fact that I knew what was good, best for me.
And who,
And the best for me was not compromising my principles.
mhm. And who was, you talked about being there for the people who are coming behind you. And I know from talking to people, that it was not only it wasn't only the Black people and even the lawyers of color, it was also the people from underrepresented groups generally.
Yep.
Women lawyers who I've talked to and gay and lesbian lawyers,
Yeah.
BTQ.
Yeah.
I know that all of those groups were also, looked to you as someone who was a champion in a firm and in a culture that might have not seemed built for their success.
Right.
But what this makes me wonder though is, as important as it is to have someone that is there for you and who's rooting for your success, who did you see as there for you and rooting for your success? Did you have that person that you would then become to younger people?
Gee, I really can't think of anyone. He was a lonely, and I'm sad to say, a solo journey. And, the people who were some of the lawyers who came behind me, I'm still friends with them. And they very sympathetic, but we were dealing with in those days more than individuals, but we were talking about an institution.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about institutional changes. I just happened to be somewhere where I could live out my values. I hope that answers the question.
No, it's amazing to me because I graduated law school in the mid 1990s, and at that time and even now, there are big questions about the how can people thrive in large law firms? And when I look back at most of my classmates, and even when I look at Stanford students now, most of them do a short stint in the law firm, and then they kind of go somewhere else. But you were someone who was able to carve out a career at really the epicenter of the Silicon Valley legal community. At a time when there were almost literally no other Black people in that type of space.
That's true. I'm not saying if I were coming along today that I probably wouldn't stay at Wilson. I would exercise. I would probably move on. But in those days, there was no place to go. One of my very good friends, he's a friend now. One day, he's associated at the firm. He had left the firm about a year. He said, "Harry, why do you stay there?" My response is, "I don't have anywhere to go." I needed a job. I had a job. It provided a very good life for my family. And I'd learned how to maneuver with many of the unspoken issues. I think that no one wants to be called racist. I don't think.
That's right. Only a few.
But and you do many things in order to demonstrate that you are, in fact, one. So, but I think you always have to look ahead. You cannot allow artificial barriers to interfere with you achieving your dream. I think that all of us have a dream. I think that being white or black should not be determining factor. You should continue to look ahead. You should continue to see our opportunity, and when opportunity knocks, you open that door and don't look back. Now, you can't do that unless you have someone who wants you to be a success, unless you work in an environment in which your values are respected. So I was lucky for all those years. And the fact that I was there was, I think, based on a couple of factors: luck, timing, serendipity.
Mm-hmm.
And you recognize that, at least I recognize that that's what propelled me. And of course, people like McCloskey, who, but for him, I would not have been given the opportunity to begin with. John Wilson, absolutely fabulous person. But you know, there are few of Johns and few of McCloskeys in the world today. Yeah.
As I said,
Right,
you are a very humble man. So
we just got rid of this person. I don't know what the politics of your students are, but I suggest that they take a hard look at what happened if you tell the truth.
Yep.
So,
okay, we're not going into national politics right yet,
yeah.
but let me try to work in some of the. We have a lot of questions in the chat here. Let me try to work in some of those. One of the viewers wants to know, when you were back at the beauty parlor, when you had your practice there, what was your biggest challenge at that time? What was that practice like? What were the challenges of solo practice, 1960s East Palo Alto in front of the beauty parlor?
Well, I'll tell you a story. It is a true story. A now retired federal judge, well known, and I'll say his name, Felton Henderson.
Mhm.
Felton ran the legal aid office. And I told Felton after the first year that he would send me all the clients who would not qualify for legal aid. But I said, Felton, I don't want your referrals anymore. How could I survive? You know, I was not. They go to legal aid. He says they're not qualified. Man, those days, they sure as hell were not going to pay me. And they didn't. So that was one experience. How was the experience?
Oh, so you told him, though, don't send you any more referrals.
Yeah, because
and how did Felton respond to that? Did he take that in stride? Or?
Yeah, he took it in stride. He didn't send it. He ended up one day, I looked across the street. I didn't have my normal coffee buddy. He had gone to Stanford.
Really?
To be the associate dean. Hey, man. So your question was, one of the students wondered how it was. Well, it was not very exciting. The good news is there was California had just passed a law that everyone had to you had to have a private defender, which was not a lot of counties had public defenders, but so I signed up for being a private defender. So that's really, those were the most, as I recall, the generation, because I was a private defender for a number of activities.
Interesting. So you did criminal law and civil law then
Oh, yeah.
over time. Okay.
I was an expert on anything that walked through the front door.
That's great. So, and you lived in East Palo Alto during this time too,
Yes,
right? And
I
then,
did.
And how did you happen to move? How long did you stay in East Palo Alto? What prompted you to move?
Well, a couple of years, but what prompted me to move is that a client came to the house. It was not a secret where I lived, but a client came to the house in the early morning, and he.
You say early morning, you mean like 3 a.m. or 8 a.m.?
Yeah, about 3 a.m.
3 a.m. Okay, I think that is nighttime, but early morning. Okay.
And he was injured, and had been injured by his girlfriend. And he wanted me to keep the evidence. I told him, keep the evidence. You better get your butt over to the emergency room at Stanford. The next morning, my then wife, not present wife, my then wife said, look, you can stay in East Palo Alto all you want, in civil rights, all you want, but I'm out of here. So that's how I moved.
And what was the evidence he wanted you to keep? What?
It was a parrot knife.
Oh, my.
Yeah, it was a knife. Anyway, so we moved. That's an interesting story. Believe it or not, we moved to Atherton, real estate, and went to an open house and then talked to the agent. The agent was subsequently terminated for taking us on as a client, man.
You're saying she was fired because
she was fired,
was willing to help you buy a house?
Yes, absolutely. And that was interesting, I thought.
Did you buy the house? You bought the house then?
Yeah. Yeah, it did, just happened to be one, as I didn't examine it very well. My then wife did. So it turned out to be a good investment. And, so moved very shortly thereafter. And if in those days, any place I would have moved, we would have moved west of the freeway, would have been, except Palo Alto, there were a few Black families in Palo Alto, very few. But Menlo Park or anywhere else west of the freeway, you would not have seen Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Housing segregation in those days was a way of life.
And what was life like in Atherton? And I've heard of years ago you had these big parties and you would host events. And what was life like there?
Well, because I was active how was it like? I really can't tell you that much because, again, the guys who worked at the firm had to be committed to work.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant 365 days of the year. And we were determined to make the firm a success. In answer to your question, I was still and remained active with the Charles Houston Bar Association, so I would host the Bar Association, have them come down every year. The first year, the white policemen in Atherton were shocked that there were so many black folks. But we got through that without any record, any problems.
But you told me that you would alert the officers that you're gonna have a party.
Next
Just
year,
so they know.
next year I would, tell them that, hey, get ready. And as I recall, they would assign a couple of officers to escort some of the members when they wanted to go home to the freeway.
That was so nice of them.
Yeah, I'm sure it was all because they all were so progressive.
Yeah, who were some of the guests at those parties? What kind of events were these? Are there particular guests that you remember?
Well, who were some of the guests?
Okay.
A lot of the guests were, believe it or not, the very, very few students at Stanford were guests.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, the local African-American judges, I say local, San Francisco, East Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Just about everybody you can think of. Local politicians. Okay. So.
That's something. Well, let me, again, some of the other questions in the chat, I want to try to get as many of these as I can. I think we have too many to cover all of them. But one of the viewers wants to know, they're struck by your ability to persevere. And they want to know, where do you find the ability to persevere and the courage when you don't see sort of models or people on the road ahead that can be role models for you?
Interesting question. Frankie, I think you have to believe in your core values.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you cannot be persuaded by the possibility of failure.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be positive. And this is especially true on racial matters. You have to keep your eye on the prize and move ahead and not worry about how many people are going to show up for a demonstration. I can remember here in Palo Alto that there would be fewer than a half dozen of us demonstrating. You can't be concerned by the fact that only a few of us are demonstrating. We're doing what's right. And I think that you do what you can do. And you say, and I think you keep doing it. And change, quite frankly, Rick, I hate to say it, change is evolutionary, not revolutionary.
Okay.
It's slow. It is slow to make basic change. You have to persevere. You have to understand it's not going to happen overnight, and you have to be in there for the long haul.
That's great advice.
So I don't know. I don't think I'm a hell of a lot different than a lot of other people who were around those days.
Hmm. You seem like it's really striking. You seem like you really gained strength, or there was a synergy between the professional, your litigator side of your life, and then also the activist, community-oriented person. Say some more. How did you combine your pro bono protest, civil rights involvement? How did you combine that with your intense work schedule while you're trying to build this law firm?
Well, I was fortunate in the sense that the firm was determined to become an institution. And part of that definition of an institution required that you be a diverse community, and that, as you know, being a lawyer, you're supposed to be giving back to the community. And I believe that we should be giving back. Lawyers take so much and give back so little. But I believe that we should do our part in making change. So that was my goal, and that was my vision.
And what was the firm supportive? You mentioned your pro bono efforts earlier. Was the firm supportive of pro bono, or did they just tolerate it?
Well, it was.
It was which? It was
It
supportive.
was supportive in the sense that initially we had a limit on billable hours, non-billable hours that would be counted. Today, the firm, your non-billable hours, and that would be pro bono, your social activism, etc. Those hours are credited in the same manner as hours which you bill and collect. Now, obviously, you can't take advantage of that. But as a result of pushing for that goal of making sure that if you participated in pro bono or any social activities, you would get the same credit. Today, as I understand it, the Wilson firm is probably one of the top firms in this on those issues. It is now a department is now fully respected and helps the image of the firm. You will recall that I said, well, they had the vision. Yes, it had the vision, and part of the vision was giving back to the community. So I think that may answer it. I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, that is great. That's really forward looking, because you were talking about pro bono at a time when pro bono was not nearly as high profile as it is now.
That's correct.
And there weren't institutionalized pro bono programs at all. There wasn't the activism at the level of the state bar. Law students weren't as activated around it. This is sometimes hard to remember how different things were then when you were starting the pro bono program, that now people maybe come to take for granted or accept that this is just the way it should be. That's
correct. But I've always felt, Rick, that lawyers have to give back to their community. We are a government of laws, system of laws, and justice means exactly that. You hear a lot of noise out there today, but it can't pop up and be overnight. It is really a struggle.
Mhm.
I'm very, I'm 86, so I do not pretend to know what young people are doing or thinking about. But I guarantee you that you gotta work your butt off to make change.
Yep. So we want to go back again. We have a lot of questions in the chat, and a number of them go back to your upbringing. And, thinking beyond the law firm and the legal practice, what were some of the key influences on you just as a person, coming of age? And then in particular, how did you manage to develop and maintain such a sense of humor? So talk first about the role that humor plays, and then what were some of the key influences in your life?
Well, I learned very early on, that if I smile, I get a long ways. Doesn't mean that I always had a sincere smile, but it's part of my personality. I found that, I would, and you always have to look at the positive side.
Mm-hmm.
Now, growing up, I had an incredible extended family. I think I mentioned growing up that my mother came out, my father, first of all, I grew up in a single family household.
Just single parent family.
Single parent.
Mm-hmm.
My father left the house when I was 3 or 4 months old, and I didn't see him again until I was a teenager after moving to California. My mother was a bus girl at a hotel in San Francisco, worked 5, would be off on Sunday and Monday, and those are the days I would see her. So I had a really great extended family. I had an uncle, for example, who would travel from the East Bay to to my high school football games. And he continued that journey during my college years. And he felt I should know that someone thinks enough of you to make this trip. And it was very important for that to happen. So it's not only just your immediate parents, it's your extended family. Who was it? Hillary Clinton said it takes a village. Mm-hmm. And it truly does. I believe that.
Okay. So we're going to move around a little bit here. Going back to pro bono for a minute, I know you had a lot of big cases that you were involved with on the pro bono side. Yeah. One of those was the Pelican Bay case, though, right?
Right.
Could you say a little bit about that? People don't know about that case.
Well, Pelican Bay, Judge Henderson, he was a federal judge, my good friend. We grew up together. Well, didn't grow up really together. He was at Berkeley, I was at State. Then we became really close friends. We passed the bar the same year.
So did you know each other before you were in East Palo Alto as lawyers?
Oh, sure. We passed the bar the same year. And there were only 5 African Americans passed the bar in Northern California. The year that I passed the bar in 1961. Mm-hmm. Felton was one of them. Mm-hmm. In any event, he's a federal judge now, then, and he was getting all these writs. And they were all coming from Pelican Bay. So he called me, but because of our relationship, our friendship, I could not be on any of the pleadings.
Mhm.
But Wilson accepted the challenge of the Pelican Bay was overcrowded conditions. That was the issue. And
And this was at the state penitentiary.
state penitentiary up near, like near, I forget the city, town, Crescent City.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we accepted that challenge and eventually won. The court in California had to correct long struggles, correct the decision. And
you had mobilized Wilson lawyers to work as a
yeah,
pro bono.
yeah.
What was that? How did you mobilize the firm? Because I can
well, by
imagine.
this time I knew who was interested and who was socially committed. So it's not difficult putting together a team. And understand that Wilson has always recruited well-respected, top flight young lawyers from the school. It was a big event, by the way, as an aside, when we hired our first Harvard graduate.
The firm, that was a big success for the firm.
Big success.
I thought you were going to say when you hired your first Stanford graduate.
No, first Harvard, we were on our way.
And what year was that about? Do you remember?
Oh man, it was in the
It was in the 70s,
80s.
80s. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And now, of course, you know, Stanford, both, and Harvard, you know, they're on the list. I doubt if I could get an interview now.
I'm sure you could. So, let me say, so we have a little more time left. I want to try to, again, get back to some of the questions people had. And one question is, you know, this is an issue people often don't talk about, but I think it's important to talk about, which is that of failure.
That of what?
That of failure. When you failed at doing something. Were there times, cases, decisions, moments in life where you confronted major failures? And if so, how did you respond? How did you bounce back?
Well, I have to think about that because I don't think you so-called, you know, if once you, in business, of course, many of the people in the valley those days would strike out because strike out on leave the company. They had an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea didn't work out. But the sign of their commitment was oftentimes they'd come back at you in another way.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they would, the ideas would be successful. Now, in a personal, I cannot remember. There's no formula to, in effect, bouncing back. I think you have to recognize that, hey, if you are committed to whatever, and I do sincerely believe that once you don't give up your core values,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't do that, sometimes if you are in the course of doing a project, and you can look back and see it did not turn out the way I would like, but nevertheless, you feel comfortable with the way you handled it. You didn't cheat, you didn't cut corners. It just didn't work out. Keep your eye on the prize. Keep, another good saying, a friend of mine will always say, keep the faith. Keep the faith.
That is good advice.
And
So,
you have to, now, if on the other hand, for example, you didn't play it straight and it didn't turn out, that's something else. I don't think that I wish that I could execute on all this stuff, but I try.
I think you have. You keep proving my point that you are a humble man indeed to regard yourself in that way. But let me, in the last several minutes here, I want to go back to the raise some broader questions about where we are now, because you were coming of age when Brown v. Board of Education was decided. You remember that decision. You were planning to go to Selma for the march in Selma in the 60s, the Selma to Montgomery March. You witnessed the civil rights movement and were part of the civil rights movement.
Right.
Now we've had in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, we have had what many people are calling a racial reckoning and an awakening to the extent and the durability of racial injustice. What do you see when you look out at all that's happening now, in light of all that you've seen before? What do you make of this? How optimistic should we be? What should we be prepared for? How should we be thinking about where we are now as a society and where we need to go?
Well, I think there have been a number of positive changes. We've got a long, long way to go. And change is slow. I'm impressed by some of the, I just don't think, by the way, that because you say you're the president of something or there's a protest somewhere, that is going to effectuate the change. I think a number of people are involved in that and are recognizing that a diverse, in the business world, a diverse workforce, which would include women, everyone, that you be judged on your merit. And I think that the issues which have faced Black people over the years in terms of police issues, that's one thing. But big issue, I think, is diversity in education, diversity in the workforce.
You think those issues are bigger than the policing issue?
Truthfully.
Education, yeah, we're being truthful. Please don't tell me you haven't been truthful all this time. Well, come on, we have 5 more minutes. It's time to be truthful.
I do feel that those issues are longer lasting. I think there's going to be reform, police reform, but I think these other issues go back to slavery.
Education and employment,
Education,
or education and economics.
education, starts with education. Education, economics.
Mhm.
And you know, from that, you got a whole bunch of things, but you, man, I told a young person one thing you got to do is put something between your ears. Get something there. I mean, it is important. Education is the most important thing, I think, going for, you know, not only locally, but nationally. And I think that's important.
Okay.
And that's not going to happen overnight. We talk about a lot of things, but I really think that I think, for example, we read how there is antipathy in the minority community regarding COVID-19.
Mhm.
I happen to think that part of it is because of a lack of education.
Mhm.
I truly believe that.
Okay.
And
Well, this is an appropriate message, given that we are a law school within a university, and our
Yeah.
project is education. So, last question though, in the last few minutes here, and then we had a number of questions in the chat that go to this. What advice do you have for young or aspiring lawyers or professionals, people who are trying to make their way and sort of figure out this world, and look to someone like you to help them? Any words of advice for them?
The easiest thing to answer is that, look, you have to find someone who wants you to be a success. And if that person wants you to be a success, they would do a lot.
Mhm.
I tell a young person, a young lawyer, is that, look, work hard, but that everyone works hard, should do that. Hook onto someone who wants you to be a success, and they'll do a lot for you. I guess networking is a very important. You see, when I was coming along, there was no networking. Today, that opportunity may exist, I don't know. But if it exists, you know, try and capitalize on it. But be true to yourself when you network.
Okay. This is great advice. This is so, number one is work hard, which everyone should do. Number two is find someone who wants you to be a success, so that they can do a lot for you.
Yep.
And
really believe that.
and
Yeah.
your recurring theme, I think, here is stay true to your core values. Know what they are, know what you are, know what you believe in, and if you stay true to those core values, that'll help you weather the ups and downs of life.
Absolutely.
Okay, we are unfortunately at the end of our time. So I want to thank Harry Bremond for opening his wonderful home so we could have this special session of Tuesday Race Talks. This has been an inspiring and enriching conversation for me to be a part of, to hear from you. I am fortunate to be able to call you a friend. There are other people there are other people who only know you as Harry Bremond, Silicon Valley legend, right?
Okay.
So we're going behind the legend to present the man. Thank you all for joining us. That is the end of Tuesday Race Talks for today. Thank you so much for joining.